Today we are joined by Ben Lambertson. He's the CEO, the everything for Ace Simulations. And we're really excited to have you here today. I think it's really interesting what you do. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass things off to you and look forward to your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate it. So, hello, everybody. I am Ben Lambertson, the proud owner and founder of Ace Simulations. So, we'll go ahead and get started. So, $100,000, that is the starting price for most fully enclosed flight simulators. Immersive flight simulation is extremely expensive, but it certainly does not need to be. So today we're going to be going through what Ace Simulations is actually doing about this. For those who want it, here's a brief overview of what we'll be talking about today. I'm going to give some background on the company and myself and the products we offer before we move on to what Ace Simulations is actually doing to make flight simulation more accessible. So a little background on myself. I've been fascinated with aviation since a very young age, and STEM programs especially have been critical in fostering my growth. UAS for STEM is one of the pretty big competitions I've been involved in. It's an international precision drone competition. So last year, I actually worked all of the artificial intelligence and automation for the drone to do its various operations. And then after that, you go into a really big flight readiness review, a big presentation in front of a panel of judges, very similar to what you would do within the aerospace industry. And throughout all this, you're learning to work in a really fast-paced engineering environment, which I think is quite critical. And then similarly, I've also done the American Rocketry Challenge. TARC is what it's also known as. And both of these are pushing the teams to basically develop custom engineering solutions to real world problems. Throughout my time, both in those competitions, but I've also been like pretty active within Civil Air Patrol. So that's the official auxiliary of the U.S. Air Force. They focus a lot on emergency services, doing counter drug missions, UAS missions, disaster relief, things of that nature. But they also do lots of aerospace education, and that's what I've predominantly focused on during my time with Civil Air Patrol. Recently, I was actually awarded the Air Force Association Aerospace Education Cadet of the Year, which was really quite amazing. And I've also been nationally recognized for one of the lessons I did, which was teaching rocket operations through a hands-on interactive kind of multi-part simulation. So it was really cool what I was able to do there. But between kind of all of these things, something they have in common is kind of inspiring people. So I've been able to watch people go from not knowing what they want to do to all of a sudden seeing what their passion is and then pursuing it for many years. And I think that's really important, especially now more than ever, that people are getting, and especially students that are getting these hands-on experiences. And it was that kind of led me to founding Ace Simulations back in 2020. And the goal was to basically provide low-cost DIY flight simulation, and through that, inspire more people into not just flight simulation, but aviation in a whole. So I started out building little airplane mock-ups in my house when I was pretty young. They didn't really serve much of a useful purpose, but I had fun with them. And it was kind of teaching those early kind of development skills. And then I ended up having a pretty big move and lots of big boxes lying around. For those who have moved, the box craziness that goes on. And so I took lots of those boxes and kind of built a little flight simulator out of it. Started kind of learning the electrical engineering side of things, how to interface with the computer through microcontrollers and things of that nature. And then in 2019, I decided to build a proper simulator. So I was interested in getting my private pilot license. And as part of that, you have to go through a pretty extensive ground training courses. And then you'll actually start your flight training and start progressing through that. So I built the simulator off of the airplane I'd be flying, which is the most popular airplane in the world, the Cessna 172, specifically the P model. So using all of the old steam gauges, you can see in the picture here, the six pack of your old analog instruments, nothing like the fancy touch screens and glass displays you have in most modern aircraft. So by using the simulator, I was able to practice a whole lot of the radio work, starting to understand the various procedures you need while flying, and just overall developing a really good understanding of how to operate an aircraft. And the Federal Aviation Administration Requires a minimum of 10 hours to get to your solo, but usually most people take 20 to 30 hours. And between all the training I was able to do in the flight simulator, I was actually able to do my solo at just 11 hours, which was really great. It saved me a lot of time and a lot of money. And I attribute it pretty much entirely to being able to do this training in the simulator. So also, as you build these various simulators, you're getting a lot of kind of hands-on work, these engineering skills. You're doing electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, structural engineering. You're even doing, all the computer and software side of things. So you're really kind of putting your foot in the door to a whole lot of these various skill sets. And these simulators, after I had built the first one, I went through and completely redesigned them. And I ended up selling build plans on my website. And I've sold over a dozen of those internationally, actually. So they're all over the world. And the idea is to, go to your local hardware store and be able to buy most of the materials you need to build a flight simulator and drive that cost down as low as possible. So what was the total cost basically of my simulator? When I built it 4 years ago, I was able to build the entire thing for just about $1,500. And that's pretty much unheard of within a fully enclosed flight simulation like this. You can go and buy a desktop yoke, a desktop throttle, and you can build a little flight simulator, but it's not nearly as immersive as this. And that immersion is really very important. So recently, Ace Simulations relocated to Phoenix, Arizona, and we began work on our newest line of simulators. So we're now building simulators out of real aircraft. We take these aircraft in, and since you're having all of the real materials, you have the real feels, the overall environment it's matching exactly what it is in real life. It's very immersive, which is critical. And so our Jabiru 170 aircraft here, you can see that featured in the picture. We have much more advanced avionics. We have these glass avionics by Garmin. So it's a Garmin G3X Touch and a Garmin GTN 750. Those are fairly new avionics. A lot of people are needing to go through transition training. So for myself, I was trained on the 6-pack, the old analog instruments, but others may have learned on like a Garmin G1000, which is another very different class display. But moving from that to something like the G3X, requires you to learn all new location of things, how to program the system, and being able to do that in a simulator like this is really very valuable. And just as with our DIY build plans, you're still kind of getting all of those various engineering disciplines working on the simulator, but you're also getting to work on a real airplane, learning how it goes together. And since each one is kind of individual, unique, you really get to go through and be creative with how you solve some of the problems. So for example, with this Jabiru 170, it crashed in 2021 and it had a collapsed nose wheel. So it was very damaged up on the front. And so as we went through to kind of develop some of the systems to integrate everything, especially with the rudder pedals, we have some challenges now with the rudder assembly was damaged on that landing. So we have to go through and figure out what can we use from the original system, what can we rebuild, and just how can we make it as realistic as possible. So how do our prices compare to competition? We are still considerably less. In fact, we're almost an order of magnitude less, which is substantial. Nobody else builds simulators from real aircraft. Most of the competitors are going to be building them from plastic molds or fiberglass structures. And they are really cool. They work. They're very nice. You can get them FAA certified and log flight time in them, which is great. But it's not as cool, I think, as having a real airplane that's flown. And it's got some history to it. So you can see this image here. This is the same Jabiru 170 we were just looking at before we actually went and turned it into a flight simulator. And it's sitting out in the desert. It was out there for about an hour, a year and a half. And there's dozens of other aircraft out there ready to become a flight simulator and kind of move on to second life, if you will. So we are actively lowering the entrance bar for flight simulation and specifically that fully enclosed, really immersive nature. And as a result, we're trying to open that up to far more people, various organizations, things like that. So one of the other things that we really want to focus on is teaching. Our founding principles are still focused on kind of inspiring that next generation of aviation enthusiasts. That's what we like to say. And that comes through kind of teaching with these simulators. We have lots and lots of videos that we put up online, and that covers the build process throughout everything, our older simulators as well as our new simulators. We do not training. I'm not a CFI, so I can't do necessarily training online, but where we walk through some of those basic procedures, just like what I did when I was first starting to go towards my private pilot's license. And to date, we've amassed over 3,100 hours of engagement on that platform. YouTube is what we do it on, and it's been really great to see all that interaction. We also have our primary showroom located in Phoenix, Arizona, and there we've had a tremendous amount of engagement. Lots of people coming in and trying out the simulator and becoming interested in going after their private pilot's license, which it just makes me happy. That's really cool to see. But we also want to continue expanding to schools and various events across the country. In just a few days, I'll be leaving for EAA AirVenture. And as a side note, I was actually able to simulate the entire AirVenture arrival in the simulator. So Oshkosh, that's where AirVenture is held up in Wisconsin. It is the world's busiest airspace during the show. And as a result, there's some very specific procedures you have to follow to make sure everyone stays safe. And we were able to practice all of those in the simulator. Incredibly immersive. We were able to use the real controllers that are going to be there next week during Oshkosh and interact with them. There were dozens of other pilots online, and that allowed us to really just get a good understanding of how to safely do that arrival. And doing it in a simulator was just totally cool. So we had a couple other people come in and try it. And for some people who had never flown an airplane before, they were able to do great just because you have all of the good warnings within the various Garmin instruments, and it has a great visual system. And I was kind of there to help walk them through the process. And so it was really cool to kind of see people coming in and being a little bit inspired by that. And then, like I said, we want to bring it to schools. I used to also volunteer at a museum. Sadly, it's permanently closed now, but getting simulators like these into museums where young people are coming in and checking out airplanes and then seeing a simulator where they can go and fly is just a really great thing. So what can you do to help? So spreading aviation, I think, is just absolutely critical. But for one, A simulations, we're always looking for funding. I've self-funded everything so far, and that's kind of limited us in some ways. But I've been incredibly blessed that I've been able to do as much as I have been. So we want to continue kind of building that funding and expanding. We're also looking for various strategic partnerships. What contacts do you have that can get us into schools or other events across the country? Finding things like that are just really critical. And then finally, and most importantly, is just share our goal. The more people that are involved in spreading the immense opportunities with information, the better. Within aviation, obviously, you can go everything from being a pilot to an engineer to even working ground support and maintenance. It follows such a wide breadth of things that you can do. It's really great. So, for instance, I've been love with aviation for a long time. I have my license now, but I'm not going to go become a pilot for the airlines. Instead, I want to become an aeronautical engineer. And you can kind of see that as I've gone through this presentation. I love the engineering side of things, that hands-on feel. So going after things like that is just really important. And Aerium especially is kind of one giant leap forward in that goal. It's been amazing kind of seeing what they've been able to do, and their vision is exactly what is needed, especially now. There's been a very large shortage of pilots, and going and kind of pushing people that may not know what they want to do, inspiring them a little bit with aviation, we can really continue building that aviation and aerospace industry as a whole. Flight simulation in general is about a $7 billion market. So it's very, very large. But mostly that's made up by the airlines with multi-million dollar full motion simulators. And there's another market to that, which is exactly what we're pursuing, which is kind of that hobbyist individual side of flight simulation, where especially with the release of Microsoft Flight Simulator 4 years ago, and Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 is going to be coming up in a few months. Building onto that audience of millions of people now starting to get into kind of the video game side of things with simulation, going after that market is really huge. So huge thanks to Aerium for this opportunity. It's been wonderful, and I'm excited to see where it continues to go. If you have questions, you have the contact information there on the screen, and then you can also visit asimulations.com for more information. So I know we have a good bit of remaining time, so I'd like to leave that open for questions.
Fantastic, Ben. I've actually brought on one of Aerium's board member, Glenn Ponis, on, and definitely wanted Glenn to be able to come on because I think he has a few questions for you. We definitely are very intrigued and are really impressed by everything that you've done. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Glenn.
Well, thanks. Thanks, David. I don't know if you guys can see me. I do have my camera on, but I can't tell if you guys can see me or not. Can you hear me?
We can see
Yep,
you
you're
and
good
hear
to
you.
go.
Awesome. So Ben, first of all, congratulations on this great work that you're doing on behalf of opening up aviation and giving students and other people an opportunity to really experience aviation in a way that you really only can with sims other than actually flying. My background is that I was in the Pittsburgh Public Schools in Pennsylvania, and I self-built 21 sims for my classroom and kept them maintained over a period of 20 years. And I recognize I recognize the challenges that you've overcome in order to be able to create an environment where you're actually utilizing real aircraft, and creating a solid simulator environment. So a couple of questions with respect to this on the educator side. One of the things that I learned in that process of building my own sims and is the maintenance that's associated with them. I was probably taking between 20 and 30 hours after work most weeks to maintain those sims. So you in your business model, as you approach this idea of selling these sims, how do you work with the purchasees to provide ongoing support and maintenance and things like that? What's your business model there?
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of twofold. Obviously, with our DIY flight simulators, we're selling the build plans for that. So you kind of take over that maintenance and troubleshooting piece on your own. And part of that is also to encourage a little bit of creativity. Like I said, our goal is get hands-on and do it yourself, right? Doing some of that creativity with those for the build plans, and especially like the 172 is how we do that. But for our custom simulators, we're trying to do as much. Basically, it's off-the-shelf hardware and open source software. So there's actually very little maintenance. We finished our simulator, the development simulator, a month or two ago now, and it's not needed any maintenance whatsoever. It just works. It's plug and play. So there's a total of three cables you need. It's a USB-A, a USB-C, and an HDMI port, and everything just works. So, but if you do have an issue with that, we have 24/7 email support, and we've done it for a couple people in the past of hopping on a video call and helping them through that. And I don't have a problem doing it as we continue to grow. Obviously, I'm hoping to grow the team, but that's something we provide free of charge. It's a learning opportunity, is what I consider it.
Gotcha. And then I'd like to spend a minute or two talking about the DIY setup. So one of the things, in addition to being vice chair of the board of Aerium, I'm also the director of high school outreach for the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association Foundation's You Can Fly High School initiative. And we're currently in 480 programs across the United States, servicing 1,000 schools, and we are preparing students to become pilots, drone pilots, et cetera. The DIY is an interesting opportunity, I think, for schools because it provides an opportunity for schools to bring kids on board, bring students on board, and actually have them be active participants in that process. So would you be able to speak a little bit about the kinds of skills that students would have? So imagine a scenario where you have an after-school club or an actual in-class curriculum where one of the activities is that the students are actually building this DIY setup. So if in marketing to teachers, what are you telling them in terms of the kinds of skills that that the students learn through that DIY process, and the value, what value do you see, because you've seen the value yourself through your own build process?
Yeah, totally. So I'll start, I guess, with a little bit of an example. I'm actually working with Grand Canyon University, and they have a pretty large aerospace club. And so I've actually worked to bring in a simulator for them, or rather, an aircraft for them, free of charge. I donated it to their club. And through that, they're now kind of breaking out and working on this simulator, bringing in funding to then purchase some of the materials necessary. And it's a college, so you're going to have a little bit higher level of education there, just with the engineering side of things specifically. But they're able to go through and work on kind of the mechanics, the structure. For example, when you take in the airplane, you're going to be cutting it and setting it up in that way. But then with the DIY simulators, you're building that structure yourself. So what we've done in the past is it's been built with PVC pipe, which is pretty cheap. You can go to Home Depot and buy that. But then you have to learn what are your mechanical strengths with this and kind of design that structure. So we've done most of the engineering for it. So when you actually go to do the build plans, it's kind of understanding, okay, this is why it's done the way it is. But then you actually kind of get hands-on and you can start testing it. So you were asking kind of what's the marketing pitch, if you will. And the real marketing pitch is it's a learning experience. It doesn't have to be done perfect and correct the first time. Making mistakes is very important. And so as you go through and build this, you're kind of following along. It's a PDF build manual, and so it's like a Lego book is kind of how we have it set up. So you'll see what are the parts you need, what are the dimensions, how does it go together. But then as you kind of build up the simulator, there's opportunities where you can make a choice. How do you want to set up your control system, for instance? Do you want to set it up with some off-the-shelf hardware, or do you want to go and build it all yourself? And then you can kind of go through and maybe include, like, for example, what I ended up doing was building it myself and doing some of the various geometry necessary to link both of the yokes together. So working with the chains and the sprockets to kind of design that. It's a lot more of a creative process in that manner. And that's really the big aspect, is making it as open for creativity as possible while guiding in the right direction. We don't want to give the answer. We want to kind of show how to find the answer, if that makes sense.
So it sounds almost as though what doing the DIY side of this in particular is very much an exercise in engineering design principles. Would you agree?
Exactly. And I mentioned kind of doing UAS for STEM, where you're developing these custom solutions. You're going to outline your requirements. What is the goal of the simulator? And then from there, you kind of build on, okay, these are the things I want to pull in. Maybe I don't need that to save a little bit of money, or we don't have the time to do that. But you can pull in the various things and really go through and kind of customize the simulator for exactly what you want. So it's very much a full engineering kind of design process, which is the goal.
Gotcha. And if I understand earlier, you said you were working on or have gotten your private pilot. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, I got my private pilots 3 months ago, almost exactly. So it was pretty cool. Did it up in Prescott, Arizona, and it was the worst weather I'd ever flown in, but I passed first try, and it was a lot of fun. So
Wow, congratulations and welcome to the club, by the way.
thank
It's a
you.
great club to be part of, right? And it's your opportunity to begin learning. I hope your DPE said that. They hand you the paper and they say this is your, now this is your license to learn, right? So clearly you've been interested in simulators before your flight training. So I'm wondering, from your perspective as someone who just completed their flight training, what value did you see simulators having brought to your flight training experience? In what ways did they help? In what ways did they provide a little bit more of a challenge? Because there are some aspects of a simulator that actually can teach you bad habits. So I'm just curious your experience, both from the good and the bad, because we'll have a lot of teachers and educators watching this saying, are simulators a valuable training vehicle? So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, so that is an important thing to acknowledge, is that misusing a simulator can teach bad habits, especially initially or early on in your flight training if you're not doing it with an instructor. So mostly that just comes down to your sight picture and learning how does the airplane fly. So I mentioned I'd soloed at 11 hours. That 11 hours was me kind of going through and making sure I had the habits and the sight pictures and how to fly the airplane done correctly. But what the simulator did help me with was All my radio calls were pretty much perfect right out of the gate. I didn't have to work on them much at all. My instructor was like, wow, I've never seen somebody start flying and be that good on the radios. I've never seen that before. And that's all just done in the simulator. I can link it up to a network called VATSIM, or Pilot Edge is another one I've used. There's a variety of them depending on where you're flying. And those will have controllers. They can see you. There's other pilots flying around. And so you can practice working with those controllers. You can go all the way to simulating full instrument flight conditions and working on that. Just learning kind of that radio speak within aviation, if you will. And then there's the other side of all those procedures. How does general aviation operate? It's not the same as commercial aviation where you have a flight plan, you're hitting waypoints. You have a lot more freedom with general aviation. So learning kind of those safety procedures, your VFR altitudes, it can be as simple as that. What direction am I flying? What altitude do I need to be at? Traffic avoidance, entering a traffic pattern. It can even go all the way down to, when I start my takeoff roll, what are my go, no go points for rejecting a takeoff? So all of kind of that mentality, aerospace and flying mentality that you need, that's what you're really building on these simulators. And it pairs very nicely with the ground school portion of your flight training. So at the same time as I was doing my ground training, my ground school, I was able to augment all that training in the flight simulator. So as you're learning how to do VOR navigation, for example, you can plug all that into the simulator and practice following that needle and making sure you're right on your VOR. So all of the aviation kind of skills and thought process that you need to get down, following checklists and procedures, that's what's really valuable with the simulator. And then if you go up to full motion simulators with force feedback and all this other fancy stuff, then you can start building in some of the additional feel of the airplane and those sight pictures. But that's not really as much the goal. The goal is to start learning the procedures, how it operates, and get you excited to then go pursue your license.
It's awesome. I can remember when I did my flight training. I've only been a pilot. I've taught aviation for 20 years, and the first 14 of those years I was not a pilot. And so my students told me, go and get your pilot certificate, and I did. And so I became a better instructor because of that. But one of the things that I found that was very valuable with simulators was specific scenarios. A good example was when I joined my flying club, I was signed off to fly two people in the 172 because I did not have any experience with full aft CG, right, max gross weight. And the way that I had to experience that was bring 400 pounds of cinder blocks to the airport, load them into the airplane, and actually go out and do, a dozen takeoffs and landings and different maneuvers, stalls, etc., loaded as max aft CG, closest to max gross weight as possible. Do you find that did you find that in your training those situational specific things that you might not those specific situations that you might not be able to directly replicate in an aircraft, did you find them to be valuable, and if so, are there any that stand out to you?
Yeah, so the key word is scenarios. So there are some scenarios you can't simulate and some scenarios you can. For example, you can simulate in very, very well IMC. Accidentally flying into a cloud. Oh no, I can't see anything, down to the instruments. That is something that you can practice really well. But then you come to the other side of that, which is I'm not moving around. I don't have my body telling me I'm flying one way when in fact I'm flying the other. So you're training your eyes, trust your instruments without the impact of, but my body's telling me otherwise. So it's kind of a 50-50 split there. Some things you can simulate really well and some things you can't. One thing that I think is really great to practice is engine out. Pull your power out, but this time you can actually kill your engine because it's a simulator. So if you have an issue, it's not a problem. So pull your engine all the way out. And I've predominantly used Microsoft Flight Simulator. They have an excellent physics model. And they actually do CFD throughout the process. And so the aerodynamic effects, while they're minimal between an idling engine versus a stopped engine, it is slightly different. And so you can kind of just practice that, practice your troubleshooting. You can inject real failures into the simulator and you can have them done randomly. So you can be flying and not know you're going to have an engine failure, and all of a sudden your engine's gone. And then you kind of get that, oh no, what happened? And just like in real life, you have a little bit of a delay to kind of identify the failure and then actually act on it. You can replicate that in the simulator. And again, it's coming back to those procedures. go through your checklist and get that muscle memory of what do I need to be doing. So some of those things are great to practice. And then some others mostly related to kind of the feel, like doing an FCG, like what you were talking about. That's going to be very hard to simulate because the control loading is not going to be changing. We've done just static control loading with, bungees and springs and things like that, versus if you go to something that's using motors to dynamically change that force, then you could start looking at simulating that.
And then one of the last things, I think this will probably be my last question. Um, One of the things that Aerium is doing is doing a substantial amount of outreach to schools and getting them interested in creating aviation programs, getting students into career pathways. What as someone who's used sims prior to flight training, through flight training, what would you say? So this is a substantial investment, right? The DIY is not cheap to do, and the custom that you're building out, while considerably less expensive than competitors like such as Redbird, et cetera, that are doing these full motions, et cetera. Um, what's the value proposition for schools? So if I'm a principal, if I'm a teacher, and I'm looking to sell the idea to my school board that I need X amount of money, whatever X is, to bring these simulators into my classroom. What is the value proposition to schools in terms of what the students get out of it? What are some of the things that you see that in with the groups that you've already worked with?
Yeah, so I'll give another example also at Grand Canyon University. I'm actually working with them to develop a capstone program where they're going to take in the parts for the simulator. And then I'm acting as basically an industry expert, a mentor. And they do all the work building it, where I'm just kind of helping them along the process, guiding, similar to what we've talked about before. But the cost of that is significantly lower. We're looking at like maybe one or two or maybe $3,000 to kind of walk through that. And a lot of that's down to they're actively doing kind of the work on it. I'm just giving them the connections to kind of follow along that route and some of the software and some small things like that. But the value proposition is it doesn't have to be that expensive. That's if you were to take it fully ready to go and done. We really want to kind of go after the DIY piece of that, which is you work on it, learn it yourself, where we are just helping you along that process. So I'll give you some numbers to help is we have our Jabiru 170. It's our development simulator. So it's a little more expensive because we spent a lot of time doing some of the engineering and research work around that. And we have that listed for $28,000 right now. And while that is expensive, I would love for it to be like $2,800. It just, business wise doesn't make much sense. But if we were to bring that to a school, in the case of the Aerospace Club, we brought in a aircraft for them to start working on for $75. So very, very cheap. And that was mostly just the cost of getting the aircraft cut and transporting it over there. So you're going to have some additional costs as you bring in some of the electronics and things like that. You can't really avoid that. It's just going to be expensive no matter what. But there are lots of cost cutting measures along that line. And I guess getting back to the root of your question, which is the value proposition, it's hands-on with real aircraft. You're learning the various engineering disciplines, and you're also getting experience with a real airplane. And if you're interested in going to an A&P route, that's important. So it's trying to expand it out beyond just having a flight simulator and flying it. It's expanding it out to all the building aspects of that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a 2-for-1 deal, if you will. You can go buy the expensive simulator and just fly it, but we really want to go after the building it yourself, and learning is the key.
Well, thanks so much, and David, thank you for the opportunity to come on board and ask some questions. It's really exciting stuff.
Yeah, of course. I think it was great questions, and Ben, I mean, kudos to you and everything that you're doing. The two different routes, I think, from Aerium's perspective, I think being able to provide you, the opportunity to have outreach to those schools and to keep fine tuning, to find what's the best way to kind of move forward is is a great opportunity, and can't wait to see what the future holds for ACE simulations and how many schools we can get you into.